I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. I think the main difference between Lucia de Burke and Lucy Letby is to do with the air bubbles. The first 6 incidents in Lucy's timeline, certainly that we know of, 5 murders and 1 attempted murder, all of them involve air embolisms. And that was Lucy's favorite way of killing. To put these embolisms into perspective, Lucy was associated with a total of 10 incidents involving air, all within 12 months. Meanwhile, if you look at Dr. Bowen, one of the expert witnesses, she said she'd only seen air embolisms twice in her entire career. She told the court that she'd seen 2 examples of air embolus in her career, and she's not a spring chicken. She's been around the block a couple of times. Just 2 instances. She says in one of these, a bypass machine was used to help a critically ill baby. And in that case, she'd seen air bubbles in the system that caused an immediate cardiac arrest. So the one was caused by a machine. It doesn't happen very often. So to conclude, and I mean, this is essentially just finishing off what I was talking about yesterday, I don't think that the Lucia de Burke case it's very similar to the Lucy Letby case in terms of circumstances, but I don't know whether the same thing is going to happen there, because Lucia's the thing that was taking place there wasn't repeated air embolisms, and these air embolisms are, as I say, very rarely natural. You can't really say that degree of air in a newborn is something that can take place naturally, and that's the main difference between the 2 cases. I must also say serial killer cases are not really my thing. I don't really cover this sort of thing in true crime for various reasons. I think the motive in this case is quite interesting, but in general, serial killers tend to be very sick individuals, and I'm not really interested in that sort of thing, that sort of level of depravity. It's not really, I'm not really interested in that. I think the reason serial killers get away with it for as long as they do is because of the level of subtlety. I think serial killers are fairly intelligent often. Because they are experiencing a kind of social death, they are on the outside looking in. They're always spectators to society. You can think of that as, I'm not saying they're always introverts, but they are often introverts. And so they're often watching, listening, looking in ways that many of us aren't. And I think that is why they're able to read society's reactions, and defeat cursory investigations. And I think it's because of the subtlety of this case, the Lucy Letby case, that there are comments like this one. I'm unmarried, I've got no kids, not many friends, I live a reclusive lifestyle. I do not kill babies. I think it's wrong to use all of these things to paint a dark picture of someone when people are similar and don't commit murder. I sometimes volunteer to work nights and weekends, and it is not part of some sociopathic plan. I've got to say, it is really exhausting on a true crime platform to have to remind people repeatedly that when we try to find out who someone is, that's one of the biggest and most important pillars in this whole true crime interrogation, is to find out their identity. Who are they? And so if this fabric starts to reflect on you and you start taking it personally, then you've lost the plot. Because we're not trying to investigate you, and we're not trying to evaluate your life. We're trying to find out who this person is. And all of the substance of my analysis is something that is anchored either in the media narrative or in the investigative narrative or the courtroom narrative. I don't just say, oh, I think that that's the case. That is something that is distilled from narratives. You can say, well, I don't really believe the court, I don't believe the media narrative, I don't believe what a friend said. Well, it is nevertheless the narrative. And if you've got a better narrative, then come up with a better narrative. But based on the narrative that we have, we try to put together a cogent scenario that sort of pulls into it all the strings, all the dynamics, all the context, and we try to make some sense of it. Again, if it reflects on you, then you're thinking about this completely the wrong way. If it reflects on you, then I think you need to ask yourself, how am I not like this person? You might say, well, I've had a relationship in my life, and friends know that. Well, that's not the case with Lucy Letby. If you want to insist that she is completely normal, then I'm not quite sure what argument you're trying to make. Especially if you're trying to say, I believe she committed this crime, but I think she was completely normal. Then what argument are you trying to make? You know, and you've got to be careful with cognitive bias in the other direction, and I think the Lucia de Burke case is a good example of that, which I covered in the previous analysis. You've also got to be careful of saying, when there is this appearance of serial killings, lots of crimes, right? Is that a reflection of a normal person in a normal situation? Or is that a reflection of a likely aberration of things like anxiety? Someone who's become unbalanced because of things. Someone's become emotional. Is this, and so in terms of Lucy Letby, you could say, if she had, let's just say, even forget about her, if the person in this scenario was engaged in an extramarital affair, right, would that be more or less likely to cause feelings of instability, insufficiency, desperation, anyway, just basically strong feelings, compared to if the person wasn't in any kind of relationship whatsoever? I'm talking about they were either in a stable relationship or they had stable friendships, but now she's actually even in an affair, in a work situation as well. And we know what happened in that situation with Chris Watts. We know it's not an easy situation to be in love. So I think instead of making it intertextual to yourself, you should think about it intertextually to actual cases and how they match those cases. I think if you believe Lucy committed these crimes, do you also want to believe everything in her life was fine, that she was happy and felt loved? That's not why people commit murder, right? People don't commit murder because everything is hunky-dory. Something is wrong somewhere. It's not that there's just a screw loose. There's something going on in their lives that they're not very happy about, that they want to change. But they don't have the social now, so they don't really have that that networking skill, whatever it is. They don't have the chutzpah to change their situation. And so they need to do it through other means. And it starts through lies, starts through manipulation, but eventually it goes another step. So people don't commit murder, let alone serial murder, because everything else in their life is perfect. They commit murder because something is clearly imperfect. And it may not be that imperfect thing to them. You might say, well, I've got that imperfection in my life, it doesn't bother me. That's not the question. It's whether it bothers that person. And something that may not bother you in your life, in your upbringing, might bother someone else who's never had a boyfriend and had a very cloistered, coddly upbringing where they feel like they deserve love. Why am I not getting it? I'm special. I don't feel very special. How can I make myself feel special? Is that a dialogue you have in your life? Well, then, if you don't, thank the Pope, you're not Lucy Letby. The thing that best prevents crimes from happening is social glue, and it's typically when society makes this criminal feel unstuck. And I don't want to blame society, but society does provide a kind of a social glue. You know, people are part of society or they're not part of it. And we're part of society via families, via networks, via dynamics, via friendships, via certain relationships, romantic or otherwise. And you can then ask yourself, what can cause someone to become unstuck? Well, losing your job, not having relationships with people, or being not treated the way you think you should be. And what do you think about an affair or a relationship ending or social death of some kind? Lots of times this precedes a crime taking place. It perpetuates it. It triggers it. We've seen it in many, many cases. Then there was also this comment, she was not friendless. Didn't you see the videos of her on nights out with friends and her best friend talking in an interview? She was considered nice and popular enough. Actually, no. She was not very popular at school. That is exactly the words of her friend, that they were not the popular group. They were the sort of nerds. And yeah, I suppose you could say it's true that she wasn't entirely friendless. But then you've also got to ask, why would she have an affair if she was completely balanced and normal? If she had all the options in the world? If she had such a big circle of friends, why would she volunteer to work on weekends? So you might see Lucy as a 26-year-old volunteering to work in the sterile, soundless sanctum of a neonatal unit over weekends. You might see that as normal in June. And that you might see that she was nice and popular. So let's take your reasoning then. Is the reason she committed these crimes random? Just a random screw loose? It's got nothing to do with anything. She just committed these crimes. Or does it have something to do with who she is as a person? Have you ever been single for a very long period of time when you were young? Specifically when you were young, when you were at school, when you were in college, when the people around you were having relationships and you weren't, what did that feel like? Did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy not having relationships while others did? When others around you were hooking up and you weren't, did you enjoy it? You might say it didn't bother me. That's not the question. The question is, did it bother Lucy? And Lucy comes from a situation where her parents kind of mollycoddled her, where she would expect and be used to getting high levels of attention and love. And so what happens when that just doesn't happen? Do you think she enjoys not getting that supply that she's used to? It's not whether you, in the way you were brought up, whether you can deal with it. It's whether she could. Do you think a naive young woman having a secret affair at the end of that, so you've been single for a really long time, you really haven't had relationships, and then you do have one, but with someone who's married, and that's perhaps your first relationship, do you think that's going to lead to a balanced, happy, glued sense of self? Do you think at your place of work you're going to be a stable person when that's your colleague? Is that going to glue her to her peers and to society? Or is she going to become unstuck? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.